welcome to Gaming Gold, Episode 7 for May 27th, 2013. You may notice we've got a different sort of look today. That's because my friend Andrew has joined us. Say hello, Andrew.
How are we doing, everyone?
So, so this is kind of an exciting day. Get a cohort here, and hopefully that'll help me fix some of the ums that I say constantly, and hopefully make it a little more interesting for you guys and get a different opinion than just me running my mouth. So that's all. Those are very good things. Today we're going to talk about some old school gaming, what our favorite games were when we were growing up. I think everybody pretty much knows mine was Final Fantasy VI. But Andrew, what was yours?
Um, Definitely have to say, going back to the old Super Nintendo, Lufia and the Fortress of Doom. Just
Mm-hmm.
a classic top-down RPG, just covering all of the base elements that you would need in it. Just
Right, right,
great story, fantastic dialogue, good combat system, and I mean, just characters that you could really fall in love with.
right, right, right. All that's very cool. Um, I played that game. I remember playing that game and beating it, but I don't remember all the characters. I mean, of course, Lufia is one of the main characters. The other one of the other characters is who Maximo, I believe, is the main character, the guy with red
Um,
hair.
Maxim was the original, one of the original heroes, and you play the descendant of
That's right.
Maxim as your main character.
That's
And
right.
I mean, you can rename him whatever you want because it's one of the ones where you can actually name the main character. The rest of them are locked in. You've got, I believe it's Jaren the elf, who was one of the original ones because it's an elf, has an
Right.
incredible lifespan. And then Arturo, I believe, is the other one who is the your other main melee character.
Right. He's the guy with green hair and an axe, if I remember correctly,
Yeah,
or
I think
something like that.
it's either a sword or like sword and shield or axe and shield or something like that. Yeah, and
Right.
then
Right.
he's up front just taking a lot of the hits and dealing pretty solid damage. So
Right. And then you have basically your mage type character, and then your
Lufia,
and Lufia was a healing character, right?
yeah, she had some offensive magic as well, but yeah, she
Right.
just
Well,
covers everything. And
in the
then
classic days of MMOs, or not MMOs, why did I say MMOs? In the classic days of RPGs, their roles weren't quite as cut and dry like they are in MMOs today. That's what I was thinking, um, because you only had four people in your party, and since everybody
yeah,
had to have
you
a little
didn't
bit,
have like
because if your healer character had nothing to do on a turn, then they would just sit there. So if you didn't need healing, then what are you going to do with that character? Um,
yeah, I mean, you kind of get into the old like Final Fantasy black mage, white mage differences,
right,
and you've got the one character who's good at one specific thing, as opposed to you get into the other veins where you've got the limited party numbers, and you had to have the all-around versatile character, your red mages, if you will. They could
right,
do it, and they could
right.
cover multiple areas. So
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that's the one thing I liked about six. My favorite game is that all the characters had their specific sort of roles or abilities, but they also had, with the Esper system, it meant that you could teach anybody any type of thing, and if they had the Esper equipped long enough, they would actually, as they leveled, they would change more to a magic using character or more to a melee character. That would actually affect their stats that they gained as they leveled. So you could even, you could take Cyan, who was your badass swordsman. If you wanted him to be a black mage, you could. You just gave him the black mage espers from the beginning, from whenever you first could, and then as he leveled, he would get more and more mage stats. Um,
yeah.
so you could sort of that was their sort of way of customizing it. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, which is definitely, I mean, you don't really see a lot of that in most of the games. You've got the character, and they're predestined for one type of, especially in the older RPG games, they're destined for one specific class. They're going to be your sword swinging, like, Berserker Barbarian melee
Hmm.
damage guy. You're going to have your offensive or healing caster. You'll have your ranged character, and they all kind of will stay slotted into that one position,
Right.
and they
Well,
might branch out a little bit.
and the main reason for that really was because they didn't have enough storage space on their
Right.
cartridges. I mean, the first Zelda game was the first one to implement a battery for saved games, um, and they just didn't have a lot of room on those cartridges to have
Oh, yeah.
different leveling paths and this character can do this and that and the other. So and with the Super Nintendo, they actually started getting to the point where you could have that character customization, and things like that, which is why you started seeing much larger worlds, much longer
Yeah.
stories, things like that. I mean, we were still sitting at 16-bit, and I I actually think that the 16-bit days were a lot better in some ways because with the limited graphics, the designers and developers were forced to concentrate on story and character, and the
Oh yeah.
solid game mechanics. Whereas now you've got, I mean, the story is still important to some companies, but a lot of it is let's make it as pretty as we can. Let's make the graphics
Right.
as pretty as we can, and the gameplay will be okay.
Yeah, you're
And
definitely looking at a lot more of that these days with all the cutting edge HD, and you're getting into the new formatting, and the TVs are getting better and better. I
right,
mean, granted, when you went from eight bit system, the NES, into a 16-bit system, whichever one you had, Genesis or the Super Nintendo, I mean, that was a huge upgrade for
right,
the time. But then you were still very required to have a good story, have character development, to have your
right,
plot, to have why everything's happening, and not just, oh, this person's going to go do this. Why? Because we said so.
right.
Which you get a lot more of. You get pigeonholed into the story, and you're very forced to just go along. You could have a visually impressive game, but if that's the only merit that it has, it's just not going to last like a lot of the older RPGs or a lot of the classics from our youth and the halcyon days, in my opinion, of RPGs at least.
Right,
I
right.
definitely feel that it's gone downhill. You'll get the gems that certainly come out,
Hmm.
but overall in the RPG realm, you're just not looking at the same quality of game as you had back then.
Right, right. And we're all the thing is too, we're also seeing a lot of games, um, the games that have really good story slash mechanics and things like that, like Skyrim, for example. Skyrim isn't your typical MMO for a lot of cases because it's so open. You can go do whatever you want. And each individual story, I like to think of them like chapters. Like if you go do you could have the main storyline, which is maybe one or two chapters of the story, but then you have the Civil War story arc, and that's a chapter, and you have the Thieves Guild story arc, and I consider those
Hmm.
sort of chapters within the game. So you have your one character, and you can go do all this stuff, and each of those stories is actually really good.
Yes,
I
yeah,
think that go ahead.
they all can be independent. They don't need to rely on each other, or you're not forced to look at the entirety of it. You can look at each individual part of that and say, "Wow, this was really good,"
Hmm.
and not just have to look at the overall game and say, "Well, yeah, I liked everything about it. Not loved specifically, but I liked it overall." With this, you can break it down
Hmm.
and look at the differences in the independent parts of it, because they all can hold their own,
Right.
especially in Skyrim.
Right, yeah, yeah, in Skyrim. Skyrim is sort of the ultimate in RPGs currently, current generation stuff like that. I'm very excited to see what happens moving forward. I think that like Square's gotten a ton of flack recently because of Final Fantasy 14, because of Final Fantasy 13, and things like that. I think that Yoshi P is their new lead developer designer for 14, and he took a step back and said, okay, what makes this game fun? What are what why do people want to play our games? And he looked at it and
Right.
said story and gameplay, and he realized that gameplay wasn't in there. Gameplay had been severely lacking because the company as a whole had just gotten to this point where they thought they knew what was right. They weren't listening to people, and they were just putting out whatever they thought was what people wanted. And
And expecting people to go along with that. This is what you want. Here it is for you.
right,
Instead of
and
listening to the players say, this is what we want, and building around that.
correct. So they've sort of he has seen that, and their president is stepping down at the end of the month. The president of their company is stepping down at the end of the
Hmm.
month. We'll see who takes his place, and what sort of how that will change the company and how they listen to the players and things like that. That all those types of things will be very good. I think that Square is in a very good position. I mean, they still have a ridiculous amount of money, so it's not like they're going to go bankrupt or anything like that. But
No.
I think that they're going to. I think that depending on what leadership takes over and their mentality, they really could turn themselves around and be who they were in the '90s. the late 90s and stuff like that, early 2000s. So I look forward to that and the return of the old school video game story. Because that's
Yeah,
something that
it's
we're just
definitely
really
been
lacking.
it's been lacking, yeah, for sure, in a lot of the games lately.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover for today. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I mean, well,
Okay. So other than that, another thing that I announced last week, other than Andrew joining me, was questions. If you have questions for myself, for Andrew, for the show in general, about games, you have comments, anything like that, feel free to send them to the show. You can find us at Gaming Gold 88 on Facebook. You can comment in the YouTube thread down here. You can send them to me on Twitter, all those types of things, and we'll get them on the show and we'll answer them for you.
definitely. Love to
So
hear from you guys.
so thank you guys. Thank you, Andrew. Have a
Pleasure
nice
to be
day,
here.
guys.
Have a good one.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for watching. And if you would like to follow us on your favorite social media site, we are on Facebook at facebook.com/gaminggold88, on YouTube at youtube.com/gaminggold88, and Twitter. Mine is at Jordan Raider, and Andrew's is at Charles Goldwing. Thank you guys again. Have a nice day.